Hi, my name is Susanna Rosema.
My name is Jeff Rosema.
I cannot remember a time in my life where I didn't hear about the good news of Jesus Christ. I was born into a family of missionaries. My mom and dad served as missionaries in 2 different countries. I spent 8 years being raised in the Philippines and 5.5 years being raised in Australia. And then between the two, we were here in the States on furlough. I remember helping my mom in Sunday school, handing her flannel graph pieces for Bible stories. And I ended up being really amazed at the Bible stories, but then when she taught about Jesus dying on the cross, that was most powerful to me as a child. And I remember in our house in Angeles City in the Philippines telling my dad that I wanted to invite Jesus into my heart. And he led me to the Lord in his study there in our house. And I just remember a feeling, and I know we don't base salvation on feeling, but I remember as a 5-year-old, because you don't understand doctrine and theology and all those things, you do remember how you feel. Later, I realized I was experiencing joy and peace. It was a very poignant moment, and I remember that. And I just kept saying to my parents, I'm so happy I invited Jesus into my heart. I'm so happy. We, as a family, did a lot of things together, serving. You know, we would go to different neighborhoods together and hand out the pamphlets. This was before technology, and put them in people's mailboxes. And I just remember setting up church on Sunday mornings and being involved, whether it was in Sunday school or singing or special music. That's how it was.
I was born and raised in West Michigan to a Christian family. Growing up, my parents both went to church. I went to church 3 times a week, twice on Sunday, once on Wednesday. When I reached around the age of 9 is when I first asked Jesus into my heart. I remember at that time, feeling just, really happy, overjoyed. When I was 11 years old, my parents divorced. When that happens, particularly around that age, it's a real loss of security. I stopped going to church because I didn't really have anyone to bring me to church at the time. There was a loss there. Probably some of my best friends were individuals that I didn't necessarily go to school with, but they were people I went to church with. After that, went through high school, went through college, went through graduate school, and I really wasn't walking with the Lord during that time. It really wasn't until my 30s when I should say, when God pulled me back in and brought me back to Him. Really what brought me back to the Lord, I think, is really I was pretty much just focusing on career, becoming a workaholic, realizing sort of, well, this really, isn't going to lead very, very far. I think there was a sort of a missing piece, in my life, like, okay, if I sort of play this out, it's okay, I'm going to work until I die, and okay, it's not going to serve much of a purpose. At that time, I rededicated my life to God, and pretty much started going back to church, reading the Bible, and at the age of about 40 is when I met Susanna.
In my 20s and 30s, I would have devotions and go to church and do those things that a Christian is supposed to do. But I will say that my walk was very stagnant. And there were times that I had feelings of being close to the Lord again, so it wasn't constantly a distance from Him. But I would say that was more a majority of the time than not, unfortunately. And then Jeff and I met when I was just turning 41, so we were late to the game. We met and knew within a couple weeks that We were going to get married, that he was the one, that I was the one, and we did, and we started going to church as a new couple. I would say we were being fed spiritually, but not necessarily growing. It wasn't until COVID we started making a shift that we should find a different church. The Lord was pointing us to Allendale Baptist Church, but what was happening was we were watching sermons from different churches that we were interested in. And then once the pandemic sort of lifted, we said, well, now we'll go in person and see what the environment is like. Now, my parents, Jim and Sheila Ankney, had gone here, but there were times when I didn't want to drive all the way to my church, so I would just join them here. I know quite a few of the folks that have been here a long time, which makes it even more special because I feel like I'm coming back home, so to speak. But, as a couple, you want to find that church that works for both of you. When we came here, the environment was so friendly and loving and sincere. It wasn't just happy faces. If people aren't having a good week, we tell each other. And if we're having a great week, we tell each other. What we noticed is we've been fed at the different churches that we visited and the church that we attended. We weren't really growing spiritually. And as Pastor Mark has said, it's not because of him that we grow, but the Lord uses him as an instrument.
The reason I chose to go to ABC is really the doctrine. We've looked at, online all the church doctrinal statements for the churches we were interested in. We felt ABC matched our beliefs. From my history, I went to a church before we met that I didn't read the doctrinal statement. Their belief system was if you couldn't speak in tongues, you were not a Christian. So that was a few years into it, so I've learned my lesson that you really have to dig into what the church believes. Probably the other reason is when we visited churches, my perspective or my intention really was to just sort of sit in the back row, observe what happens, see if if the preaching, if you're fed by the preaching, if it speaks to you. However, in ABC, we really didn't have a chance of that happening. I tried to sit in the back row, and there was about 5 or 6 people, in the first 10 minutes we were there that were asking us, giving us the third degree, what's your name, where you come from, why are you here, welcome. And so that's probably the other reason.
Once we came to Allendale Baptist Church and started learning the way that Pastor teaches and preaches, I feel like this is the first time in our 9.5 years of marriage that we're actually growing and curious again about theology and doctrine and certain aspects of the Bible. I mean, we've read verses over and over all through our lives, but when we hear it with application that he applies, it sheds a whole different light or perspective, if you will. I don't know if you felt this way, but during the pandemic, it became really clear that being without a body of Christ and a spiritual family, it's a big difference. There's a big difference.
I would agree. It's part of being a family. And that's one of the reasons, again, why we wanted to come here, is it felt like a very warm family. I think the other part is we're being fed here. It is about growth and becoming and sanctification. And I think that can occur here.
He really teaches and makes Bible learning interesting again.